Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. So June was a pretty good reading month for me. I think I had one book that I was just really kind of started out enjoying and then ended on not really liking it, and then the rest of the books that I read I really liked. So I actually have been vlogging the entire month of June every single week and have been sharing throughout every single week the books that I've been reading. So I'm going to try to keep these reviews pretty brief because I have already talked about all of these books fairly in depth throughout the month, so I will try to be concise, but I thought it would be fun if instead of talking about the order that I read them in, instead I kind of like ranked them and went from like my least favorite to my favorite book of the month. I ended up reading 8 books this month, which was pretty good. I was pretty pleased with that, especially considering some of them were longer. I have 2 books that I'm still in the progress of reading while I am filming this, so obviously they will not be completed during the month of June, or they were not completed during the month of June, but I'll go ahead and share those with you as well, just so that way you can know that I am still reading them. You kind of get a status update. So the first of those books is Don Quixote by Cervantes, and I'm sorry, I don't know where the dust jacket for this is currently. I think I'm close to 40% through this book. I talked about it in depth in a reading vlog, and I started out really just absolutely loving this book, and then it just kind of started feeling repetitive to me, and I had so many other reading commitments that it's kind of fallen through by the wayside. So it's currently like a soft DNF in that I hope to continue to pick it up over the course of the summer, but if I have other books that I am enjoying more or are more pressing commitments, I'm not too concerned about it. I'm just gonna take it slow with this one, but it's not like I'm like, oh, I hate this and I'm not going to finish reading this. I do plan to finish it at some point, especially because it's such an iconic work of literature that is referenced in pop culture, and one of the other books that I read this month referenced it so many times, which I'll get to that later. So there are certain things that I have really loved that I've read lately that have been referencing Don Quixote, so I really want to have read it in its entirety to just be able to understand those references more fully. I didn't even mention in my TBR because I forgot about this book, but I am currently reading Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is on my 5-star predictions for the quarter, so technically this will be finished very shortly after the second quarter of the year is over because I'm already 58% of the way through, and I anticipate finishing this before or by the time this video actually comes out, but I'm recording this on June 30th, and there's no way I'm gonna finish it by the end of today. So I am just gonna put this in here. I will have, you know, more of a review once I've actually finished it. Okay, so diving into the 8 books that I did finish, I do have a YA fantasy, I have like a fantasy novella, I have a middle grade, I have a manga, I have a couple of classics, and I have a nonfiction. So kind of like all over the place genre-wise. So I'm really excited to talk about these books with you because I loved most of them. Starting out with my least favorite, which I think might have actually been the first book that I finished this month, Strange to Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I loved the beginning of this book and was really digging the vibe. I really liked kind of the fantasy element of this, especially because the fantasy felt very historical in a way, where we're talking about the history of this land and stuff. It's about a young man named Laszlo Strange, and he loves stories in a world where that is not really fostered, and he's an orphan, and he's heard about this magical city, and then one day the name of the city disappears from the tongues of every person, and most people haven't even recognized there's a difference, and now instead of the city's name they just say Weep, the city of Weep, and no one can even remember what the name of the city was before, and we're introduced to a lot of backstory and a lot of history behind all of that, which was really interesting. The thing that I didn't love in this was the romance, because Laini Taylor's writing is super descriptive, bordering on purple prosy at times, but was not over the top. For me, I just felt like her writing was pretty lush, and I did really enjoy a lot of her stylistic choices in her writing. But once we got to the romance, the last third to the last quarter of this book was entirely focused on teenagers making out. And when they were not together, the world was ending, people were gonna die, everyone's in danger, but all they can think about are each other's lips and each other's tongues. And it's just so heavy in that. Then the last like quarter of the book or so, and then there's another couple in the book that are also teenagers, and they're like, well, I think we're gonna die, so we should sleep together so we don't die virgins. And there's just a lot about them sleeping together, and it was just like, it kind of ruined the book for me because it felt like that just took over this book at the end. So unfortunately ended up being a disappointment for me, even though I really liked the first probably half to 2/3 of the book. I really enjoyed, and then it really dropped off for me. So I think this ended at like a 3-star. Next, I started the manga series, The Apothecary Diaries. This is volume 1, and it was really fun. I really liked it. It's about this young girl named Mao Mao who was trained as an apothecary, but she was kind of like sold into slavery and essentially ends up being taken from the comfort district of her city to become a maid in the palace. And towards the beginning of the book, because she's an apothecary, she kind of uncovers this thing with these sicknesses that are happening with the emperor's consorts and his heirs, and she realizes that this is not just like a curse or something like that. They're being poisoned, because she can recognize the signs. And so she actually saves someone's life and then ends up becoming that person's personal maid. And so then it's kind of following her journey from there. It is quite lighthearted and funny, but there, I think, is going to be maybe some more intensity as the series picks up from what I've heard, but I really liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Next up is a book I was super excited to purchase, and that's Lone Wolf by Reka Klassen. Reka is Chantel's daughter from Chantel Reads All Day, and I'm trying to remember how old Reka is. Chantel can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that Reka is 13, and this book is so impressive for a 13-year-old. It's so good, and she designed the cover art and everything, and it's so beautiful. I love the cover to this. So this is about a young boy who is in foster care, and he's been through 8 homes already, not counting his birth home. And so he feels like a lone wolf. He feels like he doesn't belong anywhere, and then he ends up in this family, and it's just kind of following him and the possibility of reunification and trying to fit in yet another place. And it was just, it's a really heavy topic, and one that I know the Klassens know all too well because they have fostered and are currently fostering. And so I know that it is a subject that is near and dear to their hearts, and one that they have lived out being a foster family, seeing the sadness and the brokenness of the system. And so I really appreciated her take on this, but in the same respect, she intermixes it with so much humor and so much sarcasm that it doesn't just feel like this downer of a book. It is just so well done, and I really can't wait to read more of Reka's books. So I hope Reka publishes more because her writing is already so wonderful, and I just can't wait to read more from her as she grows as an author. Next up, we have my Patreon book club pick for the month of June, and that is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I love Edith Wharton's writing. This is the first book of hers that I've ever read. I think her writing is really beautiful. I just really jive with her writing. And this is a book about a young man named Newland Archer, and he is very much in the upper crust of New York City, and his family is a well-known New York City family that is very wealthy and has a lot of status. And at the beginning of the book, he is just becoming engaged to May Welland, who is a young lady who is from another very influential, rich family in New York City. But May has a cousin named Ellen Olenska, who has married a Polish, I think, count, and left her marriage in disgrace. And there's a lot of rumors circulating about her. And so because it's part of May's family, Archer is trying to, champion Ellen's cause and help people kind of come around to her and not look down on her as much. So it's not as much of a disgrace to the family, but in the process, he falls in love with her as he's engaged to her cousin. And so all of that is on the back. So that's not even remotely spoilery. And that all happens right at the beginning of the book. So there's a lot happening in this book. There's a lot. And I think it's interesting to kind of watch the juxtaposition in Archer of wanting to champion these progressive causes and wanting women to be just as free as men to kind of do what they want and not have to stay in toxic relationships and all those kinds of things. But yet he allows himself to be very bound by the societal conventions and expectations of the time, which to me makes him very unlikable because he feels very wishy-washy and hypocritical. So not a huge fan of the story itself. I found both of the main leads, May and Ellen, to be pretty sympathetic, but really didn't like Newland Archer at all. And yeah, so I'm kind of a little bit of a mixed bag on this one, but I really did love the writing and would be very willing to pick up another Warden in the future. Next up, we have my fantasy novella, which is Edge Dancer, which is included in Arcanum Unbounded, this collection by Brandon Sanderson. So Edge Dancer is the novella that goes in between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer in the Stormlight Archive. I read this with my friend Whitney Drew. We are reading through the Stormlight Archive together, although we've taken a little break because we read Warbreaker and then Edge Dancer after we read Words of Radiance together. So we will be reading Oathbringer together in July, which is wonderful. But I really liked this novella a lot. I thought that it filled in some gaps in the world and in the story itself and gave some insight and things, but we get the perspective from a young girl named Lift, who was one of the interludes in Words of Radiance, and I loved her interlude in Words of Radiance. I was really excited to get a whole novella from her perspective. I know a lot of people find Liv to be kind of annoying because she's a little girl and she's pretty immature and just young in general, and so I can see that there would be people that would not jive with this novella, but I really like her. I think she's funny. I think she's quirky and witty and charming, and so I really loved it. Next up, we have another book club pick, which I actually read with my homeschool group book club, which I'm super excited. We just started it. This was our very first book club meeting, and the book that won the poll for the month of June was The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy, which I was very excited about. I really like Thomas Hardy. I love his writing, and this is actually the 5th Hardy that I have read, and I was supposed to read it last year, but I didn't. So it's really difficult to describe the plot. I don't know, it has a lot to do with just being with the wrong person, I think. And that is kind of a theme in quite a few of the books that I've read lately, because it was definitely that way in Age of Innocence as well. And last month I read Middlemarch, and Middlemarch was the same thing. So it's really weird, but here we are. All of the classics I've been reading lately are just people really unhappy in their marriages, which is unfortunate. This book took me a long time to get into. It wasn't until halfway through the book that the plot really started picking up, and the title character, the native who returns, doesn't even show up until 25% of the way through the book. So I was talking about this in a vlog, and I was like, I have to look up a Goodreads description because I don't even know how to tell you what this is about. And that's when I found out that the title character wasn't even in the story yet. I was like, what is going on here? So it took me a while to get into this, but once I hit that halfway point and the drama started picking up, it is that classic tragic drama that Hardy is known so well for. It was so good. I ate it up. I devoured it. I loved it. And I would totally reread this book. It is so slow in the beginning, and it's not my favorite. It falls exactly in the middle of the 5 Hardys that I have read. So beneath it are 2, one that I was like, it was okay, and one that I was like, I hate this. So this is better than okay, but not as good as Far From the Madding Crowd or Tess of the Dubervilles, which are my 2 favorite Hardys that are both like 5-star, chef's kiss amazing to me. This is a 4-star for me, but still really liked it a lot and really enjoyed it, but a lot of very unlikable characters. My last 2 books are tied, you guys, so I'm not choosing a favorite between these 2. So I'm holding them up, but I love them both. So the first one, shockingly, I am shocked. I'm shocked. Labyrinths by Borges. I was so intimidated by this book because everyone I know who likes Borges is like super big brain energy, like so smart, loves like philosophy and talking about deep things, and is just really smart. And I'm not that smart. So I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm a little intimidated. And then I read the first short story and I was like, oh my gosh, I was right to be intimidated. It's tough at times. But here's the thing. Once I settled into Borges's writing style, or as Dia called it, got my sea legs for Borges, because I read this with Dia and Sandy, and my goodness, like every story made me think so deeply, and I got so much out of almost every single story in this. It's kind of composed with like a short story section, an essay section, then a parable section. And I have my favorites from each of those. And actually, I'm going to share those for those of you who might be Borges fans, who might be curious what my favorites are, because there are people I was talking to who like Borges during this. And I'm like, which ones are your favorites? Because I was just curious. So my favorites are Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote, because there is an essay, a short story, and a parable in here that all reference Don Quixote. This is the book I was talking about earlier. The Library of Babel, which is probably my all-time favorite out of them. The Immortal and the House of Asterion were my favorite short stories, and then my favorite essays were The Fearful Sphere of Pascal, and I think The Mirror of Enigmas. I didn't mark that one. I think The Mirror of Enigmas was the other one that I just really loved. And my favorite parables were Paradiso 31108 and The Witness and Borges and I. So I enjoyed most of these. There was a couple of them that I got literally nothing out of, and I was like, I have no idea what he's trying to say. But they all made me think super deeply. And another reason why I love this book so much is because I read like one chapter a day of The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer at the same time that I was reading Borges, and they're both dealing with time and our views of God and our views of man and all these philosophical things in this book that felt like they were talking to this book. And I read both of them with Dia, and so Dia and I were like, whoa. So I have to group these two together, not only because they were both my favorite books of the month, and the only 5-star books that I read this month were these two, but like they just felt like they were talking to each other the whole time, and it was so good. It was so good to pair them together. It really went really, really well together, and super enjoyed both of them. The Knowledge of the Holy is a Christian nonfiction that is basically about the attributes of God. So it kind of starts out talking about how we tend to create a God that we're comfortable with or that we can understand 100%. And if there are things about God we don't understand, we kind of toss those to the side and think, because we don't understand this or because we don't like this, God couldn't possibly be like this. And so in doing that, we actually kind of create an idol. We create this image of God that we made, not that is necessarily reflected in scripture. And so then he deep dives into scripture and goes through all these attributes of God, and we've got so many different attributes. We've got things from his omniscience, his wisdom, his transcendence, his faithfulness, his goodness, his justice, mercy, grace, love, holiness, self-sufficiency, self-existence, and that's not even all of them. And I also really appreciated, once I got to the back of the book, there are sources of biblical quotations, and you've got this whole page and then this. And a book that's so firmly rooted in scripture, despite how short this book is, just says a lot to me. So, 2 favorites. Okay, let's also do some updating on Summer Book Bingo. As you can see, I have no bingo. I should have colored in this middle space because obviously that is a free space, so I'm not far from a couple of bingos, but I did not get bingos because I was just I'm following kind of what my reading plan already was. So I'll tell you what books I used for which prompt. So right here we have Modern Classic. I used The Age of Innocence for that one. This one right here is my nonfiction space. I used Knowledge of Holy for that one. This one was my most recent purchase, which was Lone Wolf by Reika. This one right here was a graphic novel or manga, so that would be The Apothecary Diaries. Down here we have a novella, which was Edge Dancer. Right here is 2 E's in the title. I used Strange the Dreamer for that one. Could have also used Return of the Native, but I used Strange the Dreamer. Right here is An Author with a Summer Birthday. So that one is none other than Mr. Borges. And then this last space right here is a book with an adaptation, and for that one I chose Return of the Native, which I actually didn't know that there was an adaptation until after my book club, but there is an adaptation, and Catherine Zeta-Jones plays Eustacia Vi, one of the main characters, like a very, very young Catherine Zeta-Jones. So I haven't watched it yet, but now I want to because several of the ladies in the book club did watch it and really enjoyed it. So there you have it. Those are the books that I read during the month of June, and an update on how Summer Book Bingo is going. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What was your favorite book that you read in the month of June. I hope you had a really good reading month. I feel like my reading month was pretty good. I only had a couple like really outstanding books, but overall I enjoyed most of the things that I read. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.